first one is a concept called flow, which is invented by a Hungarian psychologist by the name of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Crazy name, by the way. From studying world-class performers, Anders Ericsson found that the only thing that separates top performers from others is the amount of time they put into deliberate practice. Hello YouTube, this is Frank from Happy Coder, and today in this video I'd like to talk to you about a concept that I came up with, which is the growth triad. And I'm going to attempt to use this as a general theory to explain to you why I love Vim, why I love driving, and in general, why do I enjoy the activities that I love so much. And hopefully from hearing about my insights, you can use the same theory to articulate why you enjoy the things that you enjoy so much. And taking it one step further, to actively apply this theory to transform the activities that we know that are good for us to be as enjoyable as we enjoy Vim and driving. So what motivated me to think about this? Before, when I get asked the question, why do you love Vim so much? Trust me, people do notice how much I talk about Vim, how much I'm obsessed with Vim. However, when they ask me, why do you love Vim so much? The answers I give is always superficial and abstract and not very convincing. I would say things such as, it helps with reducing the context switching between your keyboard and your mouse so that your hands are always on the keyboard. I would say something like, it's lightweight, so if you have a less powerful machine, because Vim is ubiquitously present, you can use it under any environment. And I would say things like, I just enjoy the slick terminal, the Unix looking aesthetics. However, I feel like these reasons just does not scratch the surface on an adequately deep level in terms of why do I love Vim so much. And that is until I started reading books that I enjoy and noticed that they all talk about the same mental models. For example, recently I finished reading two books, Deep Work by Cal Newport and Atomic Habits by James Clear. And not surprisingly, these two books, they all talked about the same powerful mental models that I'm going to introduce to you guys in a second. And I think if you go back to the books that you've read that had the most profound impact on your life, I wouldn't be surprised that those books would mention these three mental models as well. And these three mental models are compound interest, flow, and deliberate practice. The TLDR version of what I'm calling as the growth triad is that the reason why I enjoy Vim, the reason why I enjoy reading is because these activities, these skills, they're at the intersection of these three mental models. So without further ado, let's talk about what these three mental models are. The first one is a concept called flow, which is invented by a Hungarian psychologist by the name of Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Crazy name, by the way. And what he did was he and his team surveyed a lot of test subjects on the level of enjoyment of their activities throughout the day. And the way they conducted their research was they distributed pagers to their test subjects. And at random times in the day, they would page these test subjects. And the test subjects, when getting paged, they were to write down what they were doing and the enjoyment level of the activity that they were involved in. And from analyzing these reports, Csikszentmihalyi realized that the most enjoyable moments were actually the ones that when the test subjects are pushing their physical or intellectual self to the absolute limit. And this was groundbreaking because before this research, we used to think that happiness or enjoyment is associated with idleness, meaning you're happy when you're doing nothing. But the result of this research is saying the opposite. The result of this research is saying that when you're pushing yourself to be at your intellectual or physical limit, when you're challenging yourself in a meaningful way, that is when you're the happiest. Those moments are what Csikszentmihalyi is calling the flow state. One important insight is that there's a strong correlation between the amount of flow state one would have and one's self-reported life satisfaction. In simple terms, the more flow states you would have in your life, the happier you would be. And flow states have many components, but the most important three include clarity of goals, feedback loop, and challenge. Clarity of goals just means that you have to know where you're going. Your goal has to be clearly defined, and it cannot be vague. And feedback loop is a mechanism to tell you, are you going towards the right direction? Are you approaching your clearly defined goal? And you can use this feedback loop to course correct when you're not going towards the right direction. The third component of the flow state is challenge. And this is not just some challenge. The challenge that is flow state inducing dictates that you have to push your ability to its upper threshold, to its limit, but it cannot exceed it. So the task you're performing, it should not be impossible for your current skill level. It should try to push you to the limit and challenge you to improve upon your skill, but it should not be so difficult that it's almost impossible. Or it shouldn't be so easy so that you can do it in your sleep. If it's into those two extremes, you won't be placed into a flow state. So now let's try to frame Vim within the context of flow. And let's talk about the first component of being in a flow state, which is clarity of goals. Like we have already talked about before, Vim allows you to reduce the context switching between keyboard and mouse so that your hands are always on the keyboard. And this helps you to focus on what's important, which is interacting with the text editor. And because Vim is a multimodal editor, it can afford to have all of its shortcuts all around the home rows so that your fingers are always around or at the home row. And this is something that non-modal text editor cannot afford, so that they have to come up with some crazy combination of keyboard shortcut that you would have to rote memorize. And the third point, how Vim is going to help you to focus, is that it's highly configurable. If you're not feeling a certain key combination for a certain operation, you always have the option of remapping your keys. Matter of fact, the first thing that people who started to learn Vim would do is to remap their caps lock key to either escape, or taking it one step further to map it to be so that when you tap it once, it's escape, and if you hold it down, it's control. And by doing this, navigation within the text editor is going to become second nature or muscle memory. And this familiarity with your text editor is going to help you focus on interacting with your text. And the third component of flow state is meaningful challenges, which dictates that the more areas of improvements a skill can offer you, the more enjoyable the skill will appear to you. And in that regard, Vim lends itself very well to the third component. As you can see from this graph, the learning curve of Vim is almost infinite. The upper threshold, the ceiling of Vim's learning curve is almost infinite. There are always something that you can improve upon. There's always something that you can learn about. For example, after you have mastered the basic key bindings of Vim, after you're comfortable with navigation, maybe you can consider writing your own plugins using Lua. And maybe you can consider remapping your keys so you can navigate more effectively. Going one step further, we all know that Vim has some default text objects such as word, sentence, paragraph. Maybe you can consider defining some custom text objects. You have the option of defining your function bodies as a custom text object so that you can surround your entire function body with some special characters, or delete the entire function body, just like how you can delete around the word, the sentence, and the paragraph. And it is this steep learning curve of Vim that keeps offering you meaningful challenges that makes Vim enjoyable. And the second mental model that is part of my growth triad is a concept called deliberate practice, which is invented by Anders Ericsson. So in a nutshell, from studying world-class performers such as people who push their limit to memorize as many digits as possible, people who are top violinists in a world-renowned music school, or chess prodigies, people who are incredibly good at chess, Anders Ericsson found that the only thing that separates top performers from others is the amount of time they put into deliberate practice. And this was groundbreaking because before this finding, we used to think that people who are incredibly good at what they do, they all possess some kind of inborn, innate talent. And this study proved that to be wrong. Ericsson is saying that those people, they're not special at all. They're just like you and me. The only thing that different from them is they put in way more time into deliberately practicing. And components of deliberate practice include total concentration, immediate feedback, and breaking down a skill into smaller repeatable components. And it's very obvious that the components of deliberate practice and components of flow state, not surprisingly, have a lot of overlaps, meaning total concentration entails having clarity of goals, and immediate feedback is just another word for feedback loop. To me, these two mental models have a lot of overlapping areas, but they are excellent in their own right. They are insightful in their own right. And now let's try to frame them within the context of deliberate practice. We already talked about focus and concentration, so now let's talk about immediate feedback. And I think coding in general lends itself very well in this regard, meaning that making some changes to your code base and seeing the changes reflected immediately in the locally served web app, it's a quite enjoyable experience. So there's very little surprise that hot reload and shorter build time, these two things together, it can greatly boost the developer's enthusiasm and development experience. And with that said, using Vim as a text editor, we have immediate feedback. We have feedback loops built in every step of the way. Anytime you're trying to match a pattern using regex, using the slash command, you are going to see if your regex expression is correctly defined or not. And every time after you've defined a custom macro, when you're trying to apply the same macro to batch process something, you're going to see if you have failed or succeeded in defining the macro immediately. And to me, this kind of immediate feedback is what's making Vim enjoyable or addictive. And the third component of deliberate practice is breaking down a skill into smaller repeatable skills so you can improve upon them individually. And like we have said before, the upper threshold, the ceiling of Vim's learning curve is infinite. There's just so many things for you to learn. And because of that, if we consider all those things, all those different areas to be smaller sub-skills for you to improve upon, then Vim's steep learning curve lends itself very well as a target for deliberate practicing. Whereas comparing to just using your mouse to interact with all these GUI interface of these conventional text editors or IDEs, if you're bored with that, after you've mastered the basic Vim key bindings, like we said before, you can challenge yourself to learn and start writing your own plugins. You can try to define your own custom text objects and remapping keys for different modes. And if you want to take it even further, you can use Vim in a headless way to use it as a batch text processing tool, which might be an overkill. In my opinion, scripting languages are more suited for those kind of jobs, but if you want to, you can totally do it with Vim. And having all those smaller things, having all those smaller sub-skills that you can learn about, that you can improve upon, is what's making Vim addictive and enjoyable. And the very last mental model that I want to talk about is compound interest, invented by, or at least popularized by, Naval Ravikant. And I've talked about Naval Ravikant on this channel before. I think Naval Ravikant is one of the wisest people of our time. And the TLDR version of compound interest is that it's a small, consistent, incremental improvement that is eventually going to lead to potential growth over time. And to that point, if you want to benefit from collecting compound interest, you have to consider time to be your friend. You have to be patient. Anytime when you pull out prematurely, anytime you cash out your equity, you can only hurt your own investment. And the second thing about compound interest is the network effect. It's by leveraging multipliers, you can improve multiple different areas implicitly. And this is what's attractive about compound interest. And now let's talk about Vim within the context of compound interest. In my opinion, Vim is one of those things you can just learn it once and you can start using it everywhere. You can start using it under any environment. Whereas you would have to memorize all those awkward, crazy keyboard shortcuts for different editors such as VS Code, Sublime, JetBrains, whatever. All these text editors offer their own Vim mode or Vim plugins. Matter of fact, if you are using a text editor that either doesn't have Vim support or doesn't have a way to emulate Vim, then it tells me that it's not a good text editor. Their developer don't know what they're doing. And it's this ease of comfort of knowing Vim is not going anywhere. Vim has been here before I became a developer, and it's going to continue to be there long after I stop being a developer. And all I have to worry about is to get more proficient with using Vim, and I can just use it anywhere. So to me, that's the part that we just talked about. It's the small, consistent, incremental improvement. We just need to worry about learning Vim, which is a crazily sophisticated tool, but we just have to worry about slowly, methodically learning small pieces of Vim every day, and eventually it's going to lead to exponential growth. We're going to be so much more performant, so much more efficient when it comes to interacting with our text editor and just interacting with texts in general. And the network effect that I want to talk about within the context of Vim is that Vim broadened my horizon when it comes to other tools, mainly terminal tools that relies on config files and just makes you much more efficient and productive versus manually interacting with a graphical user interface. It was from tinkering with my vimrc file that I learned about tools such as the Z shell, the bash scripting language, and terminal tools such as tmux. And these are the tools that I wouldn't have been exposed to had I not taken an interest in Vim. So the network effect of compound interest dictates that because the things that you're improving are multipliers, by leveraging them, you're implicitly improving multiple different areas at the same time. So my argument is, by getting better at Vim, it first of all exposed me to tools, to command line tools and the Linux operating system. And secondly, it made me think more about automation, configuration, and open source in general, which ultimately made me a more well-rounded programmer. And now let's try to frame another favorite activity of mine, which is driving, within the frame of growth triad. We can talk about the clarity of goals. So when you're driving, the goal is to arrive from point A to point B at speed, but also with great precision and smoothness, which demands total concentration. And this total concentration is what's making driving enjoyable. And we have a built-in feedback loop. So anytime when you're steering the steering wheel, you can feel the haptic feedback of how much grip your tires have transferring from the steering column onto your hand. You are eminently aware of the weight transfer of your car from one side to the other when you're going from one corner to the next. And the throttle control, the very minute difference in terms of pressure you're exerting on the throttle, especially when it comes to higher end performance cars, making a huge impact on your speed, on your pace. These are all the feedback loop that is making driving a very enjoyable, very addictive experience. The compound interest aspect of driving a vehicle, in my opinion, comes to the freedom that it affords you. You can go to more places, you can go further, and along the way you're going to make meaningful connections. You're going to talk and meet with more people. And these are the compound interest you're collecting from driving a vehicle. However, if you're just passively driving and never challenge yourself to learn about like managing your tires, managing weight transfer, if you're just a soccer mom driving a van, like talking with your 4 sons in the back while you're driving passively, then you wouldn't find driving to be an addictive, enjoyable activity at all. And the next activity I would like to put in the context of the growth triad is the Zettelkasten note-taking method. When we're reading literature notes with the Zettelkasten method, we do have clarity in our goals, which is to extract insights out of the text in the form of permanent notes. And we have a built-in feedback loop, which is when you were paraphrasing the insight that you saw from the text into your own words, it's a really good way of testing your understanding. Because if you do not fully understand the material, it would be almost impossible for you to put the material in your own words. So that's a great feedback loop, so that when you're having trouble paraphrasing the insight, you can always go back to the material, go over it again, improve your understanding. And the compound interest aspect of taking Zettelkasten notes comes down to connecting your new insights into your existing permanent notes, so you're forming a solid network of knowledge, and you can use your previously accrued knowledge as cues to retrieve this new piece of insight you've just added to your framework. And again, if you're just reading passively and never taking notes, it's very unlikely that you would see reading as a very rewarding, a very addictive activity. However, because the Zettelkasten note-taking method lends itself perfectly at the intersection of the growth triad, by doing this, you're going to transform reading into a greatly enjoyable activity. And I want to talk to you guys about how I have been using the growth triad to try to turn activities that I know that are good for me, but I found to be kind of boring or not enjoyable, into something that is enjoyable. And the example that I would like to use is my experience in learning about data structure and algorithm. So for me personally, I understand logically that getting better at data structure and algorithm is going to make me a better developer in the long run. However, just like many other people, I found it to be incredibly boring and very, very difficult. That's why I try to implement the growth triad actively to my DSA learning experience in hope of turning it into a more enjoyable experience. So in terms of declarative goals, I used to listen to podcasts or some music trying to distract myself while working on some easy lead code problems. And looking back, that's the wrong way of going about it. So these days when I'm studying data structure and algorithm, I try to, like we have mentioned in the flow state mental model and the deliberate practice mental model, both of them stress the importance of total concentration. So these days during my study sessions, I just laser focus in on the problem at hand and eliminate all other distractions. And that made a huge difference in terms of retention and understanding. And in terms of the feedback loop, what I did was I started to leverage LLM to get immediate feedback on my intuitions. We all know that when it comes to lead coding, when it comes to competitive programming or data structure and algorithm interviews in general, the most important part comes down to your intuition. If you have the intuition, if you know the right pattern that is going to solve the problem, I would say that's 80% of the work that you have already done. The actual implementation part is not that difficult. It's almost just a matter of translating your pseudocode into the correct syntax of your programming language of choice. So nowadays, instead of jumping into the implementation phase and start running my program, what I would do is I would write out my intuition along with my pseudocode and feed it to the LLM along with the problem prompt to get immediate contextual feedback on the quality of my intuition. And if my intuition is wrong, I would ask the LLM to gently, verbally nudge me until I've arrived at the correct intuition. And this has saved me so much time and made the learning experience so much more enjoyable. And lastly, the compound interest aspect of learning data structure and algorithm, in my opinion, comes down to learning about the patterns It comes down to learning about the patterns first instead of memorizing the solution to individual problems. What I mean by that is, in my opinion, I believe a lot of other influencers have talked about the same thing before. In my opinion, it's way more productive for you to learn about the general patterns. For example, learn about binary search, learn about data structures such as linked list, trees, graphs, stacks, queues, and the data structure that I was studying before, heaps or priority queues. And in my opinion, you should learn about these patterns first before delving into the individual problems that leverages these patterns. Because, for example, I was studying priority queue. It's way more productive. It's way more beneficial for understanding if you have implemented a priority queue by hand. I'm a JavaScript developer, and in JavaScript, there's no built-in priority queue data structure. So it's way more productive for me to have implemented priority queues by hand and have implemented methods such as heapify down, heapify up, and general methods such as inserting elements into the priority queue and removing elements from the priority queue and reheapify so that your priority queue stays heapified. It's way more productive to have gotten through this part so that when you're working on problems that call for such data structures, you already have a deep understanding of how this thing works. And like we have said before, when we're talking about the compound interest as a mental model, these patterns, these data structures are going to be the multipliers. And by leveraging them, you're going to improve multiple things at the same time. Over time, you're going to realize that tackling individual problems is no longer difficult because you already know what the correct intuition and what the correct pattern would be for this particular problem. And that is in opposition to how I used to study before, which was distracted and disorganized. And last but not least, I want to talk about some activities that by nature is going to lend themselves greatly in terms of hitting all the three mental models that are members of the growth triad. And these are the skills, by definition, is going to be very enjoyable by default because by definition, they just situate themselves perfectly at the intersection of the three mental models. And these activities, in my opinion, include martial arts, musical instruments, and strategy games. And so, for example, martial arts, we have heard so many people, prominent figures, talking about martial arts to the point where, like, you can see in this picture, the Zuck is doing BJJ. So let's break it down. Okay, clarity of goals. In martial arts, the goal cannot be any clearer. You're trying to tap your opponent out. That is going to lend you great concentration at the moment, which makes it enjoyable. And you're going to have feedback loops. Any punches, any kicks, when you're dodging your opponent's attacks, these movements all come with immediate feedbacks. Are you getting hit or not? Are your punches getting connected or not? And these feedback loops are going to make the activity enjoyable. And lastly, compound interest. By striving to become better at martial arts, you are going to be eminently aware of your quality of your diet. How well are you recovering from each workout? And these things altogether is going to elevate your overall fitness level. So that's it, guys. That's how I want to talk to you guys today. Hope you found my concept of growth triad to be interesting. I hope you found it to be somewhat insightful. And please leave some comments down below. I would like to hear about the activities that you guys found to be enjoyable. I still consider myself to be an intermediate user of Vim. So if you're on the more advanced side, please share with the rest of us resources and ways that you have found beneficial in your own Vim learning journey. And with that said, I will see all of you in the next video. Bye bye.